During this component of the fx-300ES Plus overview, we are going to look at the basic keyboard and the setup menu. We'll work our way from keys in the top left to the bottom right, and I want you to pay special attention to the yellow shift and the red alpha key. This is how we'll access each of the various inputs in yellow or red above the keys. At the top left here we have absolute value and division with remainder. We have x cubed. We have a colon, which indicates that you can put multiple expressions on a single input. It's not used terribly often. We have x to the -1 power, or x inverse, and the factorial. The log of any base is very popular. We'll be coming back and spending a little more time talking about that one. Another special feature of our calculator is this fraction key and mixed fractions. We use these a lot. We have square root and cube root. This is a recurring decimal, which we'll spend more time on later. X squared, x to any power or the root, and logs and natural logs and their associated exponentials. We have the negative key, degrees, minutes, and seconds, which is often used in the case of time, but also longitude and latitude. We have factorial, which is a really nice feature we'll also come back to. And then we have hyperbolic trig functions and regular trig functions and their various inverses all available. We have the ability to store and recall values from these red letters, which represent variables. And here we have engineering format, which is an interesting format. I'll show you a quick example. Some value you get. If you want to put it into engineering format, you press this, and now it's in an exponential format with a power that is a multiple of 3. So if I start here and press engineering one more time, you'll notice it drops it to the 10 to the 0 power, 10 to the -3rd power. Sometimes, depending on the length, you might get it as low as 10 to the -6th. And then if I press shift in that, you'll see it steps the opposite direction. We have parentheses, comma, percentage, and the ability to get an answer when you get it in fraction form, which is standard. If I press this S to D, or standard form to decimal, it will toggle this back and forth. We can do the same thing with square roots and toggle those back and forth. And then we have our memory interaction. A little farther down, we can clear everything. If you ever want to clear the memory, or maybe a setting got fouled up and you're not sure what else to do, you can press shift and clear, and then all equals for yes. And so we just reset everything. You can do permutations and combinations. If you're not familiar with that, that's fine. Math teachers who use them will know what they are and will be looking for them. We have greatest common divisor and least common multiple. Those are pretty popular. Polar and rectangular values for angles. We've got integer values and greatest integer values and random numbers, pi, Euler's constant. All these we'll spend a little more time with later, making sure that it's very clear. And if you ever get a result that you want to reuse, this answer key lets you use the previous answer. So now that I have 3 halves, if I wanted to do 4 minus that answer, it'll pull the 3 halves in and then subtract that for me. Before we wrap this up, I also want to take a quick look at the setup menu. You'll notice that's in yellow, so to access it I'm going to press shift and then setup. And I'll go one at a time. We have math input output. To start out with, by default your calculator will be in math input and output mode, which means that our nice natural display, pretty fractions, pretty roots, will always be in that 2-dimensional form. Some people wish to turn this off. To do that, you can turn it into linear form. So all of that must be entered on one line with parentheses and roots and everything all on one line. And it's definitely harder to read, but for various reasons, some people prefer that. And then you can sort of do a combination. If you press 1, you'll notice that I can turn just line output on. So maybe math input is already on now that I've picked it, and this allows me to choose between math output or linear output. Now we also have the ability to change our angle measure units from degrees or radians or gradians, and we can change our decimal position by fixing the decimal point at perhaps 4 decimal places. So now when I get a result, you'll notice I have 4 decimal places, 4 places after the decimal. I can also put it into scientific notation. I'll do 4 again, but now you'll notice instead of 4 places after the decimal, I get just 4 digits in scientific form. So no matter what I come up with, it will always give me only 4 digits in scientific form. And lastly, we have normal mode. And normal mode is going to display values in more of what you would consider the normal output of a calculator, where it's not forcing it into scientific notation or forcing it to a fixed number of decimal places. When you select normal mode, you're going to be asked to choose between norm 1 and norm 2, and really the only difference is how small of a decimal they will accept before kicking into exponential form. Norm 2 will take really small decimals, like 0.000001 will be fine with norm 2, whereas in norm 1, once you get any smaller than 0.01, it'll kick into scientific notation just a little sooner. So that's just the only significant difference there. And lastly, we have this other page. You'll see this little down arrow. So if I press down, we have one more page of setup values. You can turn it into the default for fractions is mixed. So 1 3/4 versus 7/4 if you have it improper. Stats, we have the option to display a frequency column in the stat mode stat editor. Table, you can decide if you want a single function f of x or 2 functions f of x and g of x, and you'll see what I'm talking about a little later. You can turn the option to have a recurring decimal displayed on or off. You can adjust the display to show either a dot or a comma to distinguish your decimal point. Different cultures, different regions use this differently. In the US, it's common to leave that on a decimal point. And lastly, you can adjust the contrast right here. So now that we've taken a look at these functions, we'll wrap this up and we'll go a little more in depth into each of them at this time.